Thank you all. I'm going to start all over because this, and part of it is that this does go on the website, and so we'd love to have the whole spiel. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Rachel Mostalish, and I'm the Sherman Fairchild Conservator in charge of the Paper Conservation Department here at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. I want to welcome you all to our annual Technical Art History Symposium, and to thank you to our colleagues who are joining us here in person, as well as those who are joining us virtually from at least 10 different countries and several time zones. The annual event is supported by a generous anonymous donor to whom I would like to give great thanks for allowing this knowledge sharing of an important area of conservation, the study of materials and technical aspects of works of art. Investigating these works of art reveals information about the place, the history, the artist's choices, the influence, and the economic and social conditions by which artists were working. And this year, our symposium is called Artists and Printmakers. We'll delve into how printing techniques from traditional to experimental and the variations thereof and the imagination and skill of printmakers and artists create unique works of art that can be beautifully complex and mystifying, and how collaboration between artists and printmakers can bring about extraordinarily beautiful and interesting results. Today's speakers are Jacob Samuel, master printer and publisher, and Kiki Smith, multidisciplinary artist. After both talks, we are going to have a Q&A. And for those who are joining us online, please feel free to put your questions in the chat. And after both talks, for people who are here, we also have a selection of some of their works that we can look at in person. So I'd like to introduce our first speaker today, Jacob Martin Samuel, who has printed etchings for 48 years. After attending the California College of Arts and Crafts, graduating with a major in photography and a minor in printmaking, he moved back to his native Southern California to begin a 2-year apprenticeship in printing etchings. In 1980-81, he worked for editions at Gemini JEL, collaborating with projects with Richard Serra, Michael Heisner, Ron Davis, Ellsworth Kelly, Saul Steinberg, and Sam Francis. The collaboration with Sam Francis resulted in the artists asking Samuel to work with him exclusively, and a relationship developed that endured for 14 years until the artist's death in 1994. During their working time, Sam Francis established the Lapis Press to publish limited edition livres d'art, and Samuel worked with Ed Ruscha, Richard Long, Joe Good, and Wells Francis himself on these limited edition books of etchings. Through this exposure of small print formats, Samuel established Editions Jacob Samuel in 1988, publishing a series of 65 artist books, both bound and in box portfolio sets. Among the artists include Marina Abramovich, Chris Burden, Mona Hatoum, Rebecca Horn, Anish Kapoor, Yannis Kounelis, Barry Levy, Joseph McKenney, Barry McGee, Meredith Monk, Gabriel Orozco, Giuseppe Pannone, Robert Theron, and Tom Sachs, Christopher Wool, and Andrea Zettel. Many of which of these have been gifted to the Met in a wonderful gift that we got last year of 19 of his printed portfolios and books. In addition of the works, he also worked with, in addition to many of his works, also have been acquired by LACMA, The Hammer, as well as Museum of Modern Art has a complete set of all 65 publications. In 2015, he started a new imprint called Green Dolphin Street, dedicated to publishing the etchings of Christopher Wool. And he has also taught printmaking at UCLA for 13 years. In 2022, he retired from printing, publishing, and teaching. However, I'd like to say he has continued to teach me a great deal about printing and printmaking. So please welcome Jacob Samuel. Right there.
That's still go forward.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yes.
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction. Good afternoon. I would like to begin by just giving you a very, like a 2-minute orientation to, can you hear me if I just stand up straight? I don't have to lean into the mic? Okay. Yeah, just a 2-minute orientation as to my background and how I wound up doing what I did for most of my life. Going all the way back to high school, I was in charge of the photo lab, and I mixed chemicals and was more involved in lab procedure than I was in taking photographs. After high school, I was fortunate enough to become a studio assistant to a woman who was a Bauhaus trained photographer. And she and her colleague taught me so much. It was a kind of apprenticeship where I was printing off old glass negatives, and I would bring out a proof to show them in their sitting room, and they would rip it up, and then I'd bring them another proof and they'd rip it up, and it would go on for days like that. So it was a very classical education in that regard. Then I went to art school in the Bay Area in the early 70s, actually starting in 1970. And the orientation there at California College of Arts and Crafts, why I went there was for the craft part of arts and crafts. The dominant aesthetic was called nominal subject matter, which was they didn't really care about the subject matter that the students brought. All they wanted to see was whether you could do what you did really well and to teach you how to do things really well. So they weren't really involved in theory or aesthetics as they were in like zone system photography, large format, continuous grayscale, which led naturally into etching. So now you have an understanding of the background, and what was important to me was learning how to, over the course of years, master the grayscale. Now, California in those years, of course, in the early 70s, we were coming out of the California photography, black and white, large format school, Ansel Adams, Edward Weston, as Ansel Adams said, it's like a photographic print is like the plate or the negative is the score and the print is the performance. So you're working on the score and you're working on the performance at the same time. That was my orientation. After that, I was an etching apprentice for 2 years, as Rachel said, and then I really started to get into it more deeply. So I'd like to start now with the slides. That's all the background you need about me. This little Picasso print sits above my desk, and the plate is about 1 inch wide by about 6 inches tall. And it's an old piece of, like, obviously scrap copper. And it's a combination of dry point and scraped aquatint. And I look at it every single day. A number of the prints in this beginning of this presentation are things that are in our house. And what I look at every day for inspiration. So what I find really great about this particular print is it says there were 6 states of this print. It is a little piece of scrap metal, and Picasso worked on it over and over and over to get it right. He scraped it down, he redrew it, he scraped it down, he redrew it, state after state after state until he gets it right. And so I find that, this is from 1932, by the way, and it was found after he died. There was a box found in his studio that was referred to as the box of neglect. And so there was a number of editions that he approved that were editions, but he never signed. As printers, and a number of people know, sometimes the hardest part of the project is getting the artist to sign the print. So anyway, in Picasso's case, and obviously in the Vallard suite, that's why the paper mark is in the paper with his signature on it, because he didn't want to sign the prints. But Vallard died in the car accident. The prints sat around for a long time while Vallard's estate was settled, and then the person who bought all the prints convinced Picasso to sign 4 of the editions that were very special. But primarily, most of the editions weren't signed because of there were so many prints in the Vallard suite. There were 30,000 prints altogether, individual prints. So this isn't from that, but it's from that period. And so the signature is actually an ink stamp, but the print is just gorgeous, and it's just small and intimate and sweet. And so this is what inspires me. Okay, this is why I did what I did for 48 years, was this kind of work. This is not an etching. This is a Dürer woodcut. I included it because their book has just been published by Princeton called Dürer's Knots. And it's about this really interesting series of mandalas he did. They're based, according to the review I read, it's based on Islamic artistic patterns. And I thought that was fascinating, the cross-cultural thing between Islamic countries and Northern Europe. And it's just so tight and so well done. And everything we know about Dürer is so magnificent. And, you know, the complete body of engravings, I'm sure pretty much everybody in this room is familiar with. But not that many people are familiar with this particular series of woodcuts. So I would, anybody who is interested in this kind of imagery, I might recommend this book, Dürer's Knots, that's just been published by Princeton. The rest of the stuff is etching, but I just had to include this. So, and here we go. We have this big jump all of a sudden from engraving to etching with this Rembrandt self-portrait. And everything all of a sudden can get really loose. You know, if you look at in classical engraving from the Northern European tradition, very, very stylized and very, very tight. But with the advent of etching, as opposed to engraving, which is drawing with the needle through a ground, which allows you much more spontaneity, you'll all of a sudden you'll get actual, you know, this very lifelike drawing that incorporates sketching as well, and incompleteness, which really allows the focus to be just on the visage there. It's a fantastic self-portrait, one of many that Rembrandt did. Here's a Goya print. It's not like a great impression. I don't know if anybody here has really seen what they call studio prints of Goya that he did during his lifetime, because like with so many plates, like with Rembrandt plates, for instance, or Dürer plates after their lifetime, the plates were sold and continued to be printed. But it's Goya and it's great. And there's so many, and this is really, you know, sort of the beginning of aquatint in a certain sense, even though in France it was being done years earlier, decades earlier. But it's just, his particular prints are so beautiful, the graininess of the aquatint. In the studio prints, though, you don't really see the grain as much because the way they're wiped in the studio, the grain almost disappears into the fullness of the way the ink is ink is left on the surface after the plate is wiped. But I still think basically what this first 6 prints is, I would call homage to the ancestors. So I just want to pay respect to the ancestors. So here we have Piranesi. I could probably spend the rest of this presentation just talking about Piranesi. I've given lectures solely on his work before. And suffice to say that from a working class background and coming into stage design in Venice, he moves down to Rome and falls completely for etching and stays there and serves an apprenticeship and was already obviously a great draftsman, and founds this studio that his sons work at, and did these veduti of Rome, these views of Rome, of the monuments in decay, the contemporary architecture that he sold to tourists. Because, as I said, because he was from a working class background, he wanted to make a living. And this was like people would come down from Northern Europe for the grand tour, and they would buy his prints and take them up north as souvenirs. So it's important to reference this because prints are multiples, and they were conceived. So when we look at Dürer's prints, and he has his AD monogram, he was the first person to really get into editioning and to have a brand and to be a publisher in this sort of sense as a self-published artist. So we're kind of moving through that right now to Piranesi over a period of about 250 years. Of course, then Picasso, who made, you know, thousands of prints. He probably made 15 or 1,600 etchings. I don't know the full amount, but this is a particularly great, well-known print, Weeping Woman. It's a dry point, little tiny bit of aqua tint. But as I said, I always think of Picasso, to quote Sammy Davis Jr., as the hardest working man in show business. The guy just couldn't stop. And above our bed, I don't have the print here, but above our bed, we have a print that he did when he was 91 that has 13 states. It's a big plate. He didn't have to do this. He just couldn't stop. And the guy worked up until the end. And he invented so many techniques in every print media that it's very important for me to also pay homage to his work. Now, his printer toward the end of his life was Aldo Crommelink, who had the fortunate experience of being with him in his studio in Paris, and then he visited me in Santa Monica at my studio. And I would consider him to be the foremost mentor that I had. And even though the time we spent together wasn't long in duration, it was long in what I learned from it and what I learned from him. And what I really learned from him is what it took or what it takes to do something great. And of course, in every media, everybody has this. And in, you know, whatever discipline it is, time spent over decades and learning how to do things correctly. And the main thing is taking your time and knowing there are no shortcuts. These are the things that I really learned from Aldo Crommelink. So this is a print he did with Richard Hamilton. I happen to have been fortunate to have been in the studio in Paris while he was working on these prints. And so I was there with Richard Hamilton, with Aldo Crommelink working, and you know, they allowed me to be in the studio with them while they were drawing, while they were etching. And that was an education that was priceless and impossible to duplicate. This is another print that's hanging in our living room. It's from the suite by Richard Hamilton of based on Ulysses. So this is the transmogrification of Leopold Bloom in the Circe chapter of Ulysses. And it's so, I mean, I walk by it every day and just venerate it in our house because, I mean, it's so completely beyond in terms of the technical achievement. And you know, it's there to keep me humble. Now we start. Okay, so I work for Sam Francis, who's known as a colorist. I worked for him altogether for 18 years. And it was a great relationship. And over a period of 14 years where I worked for him full time, we did full color, very large full color aqua tints. I did 120 full color aqua tints with him over 14 years. And they were ranged from, you know, small prints that you'll see that were book size and limited edition books to very large 3 by 6 foot prints with 35 colors. I printed them all by myself. I did not have any assistants, but the fact of the matter is that, and everybody here in the room who is either an artist or a printer or whatever they do, a curator, whatever they do and they want to do it well, knows that things take you know, a very long time and you devote yourself to them day after day after day. And so what I was more attracted, as you saw earlier, to black and white work. And so I pulled this particular print of an aqua tint by Sam Francis. It was a full color aqua tint, just in shades of black and gray. And I wanted to contrast it with our bread and butter, which with prints like this. And this is a pretty sparse Zen print for him. A lot of them were a lot more complex, but I happen to like this one for its simplicity. So this print's about 6 feet tall, the plate. And I guess it looks like it's about 20 colors. Spit bite aqua tint with sugarlift aqua tint, which was our basic modus operandi. And like I said, I did about 120 different prints with him over 14 years like this. However, this is kind of jumping ahead, a little out of order. I started my own publishing company while I was working for him. He started this company, as Rachel mentioned, called Lapis Press. And he was very interested in Jungian psychology and also in the livre d'artiste tradition in Paris, because he lived in Paris for years on the GI Bill. That's where he really became a great painter. And so he always had artist books around. He had, for instance, Jazz by Matisse, and he had Picasso limited edition books and, you know, books from small presses in Paris, combined printmaking and letterpress. And then he started his own livre d'artiste company, Lapis Press, and I did books, as Rachel mentioned, with the first one was with Richard Long, which is going to come up in a second. Richard Long and Ed Ruscha and Joe Good and Sam Francis. And so they were books of etchings with text primarily. But then I started my own company, and this is one of the first things that I published. This was with Robert Therian and John Yao. And one thing that's different about this particular presentation than from other ones I've done is I've concentrated, because I published primarily, actually only in suites and portfolios. I didn't publish any individual prints. I did not want to. I wanted to challenge the artist. I wanted to challenge myself. And I wanted to challenge the market, because working for Sam Francis, you know, was like we'd sell out these editions that I'd do in a week. because hey, well, I just lost you guys. Okay, I must have leaned on something, but let's get back there. Okay. Anyway, I won't lean on this thing. Yeah. So I got really tired of big color prints because, like I just said, I did 120 full color San Francisco prints. I don't have any in my house. I like really small, intimate work. I like monochromatic work. So I decided I'm just going to print small format, monochromatic work. That's it. That's all I'm going to publish. And, so I had a very limited audience. It just so happened that my audience happened to be museums and national libraries all over the world. So I'm very, very grateful for that. I had very, very few private collectors, like virtually none. But I did what I wanted to do. That's what you're going to see now. So that's why I showed you that Picasso print at the beginning that's above my desk. The plate's 6 inches tall, 1 inch wide. But look at the variety of line in it. Look at the combination of these very, very fat dry point lines with scraped out aqua tint and just all the stuff all happening with a very small space. I find that interesting. I never wanted to do any work that would come out off the wall at me. I only wanted to publish work that I would have to enter into. Okay, so that is my dominant aesthetic. That's why I set out to do this very, very particular way of working. So one of the guys I worked with, one of the people I worked with, was Bob Therian, who is an LA artist. And I did a series of prints with him called hand-colored prints that took 7 years. And then when we finished that, that was another thing about an ethos that I learned from San Francisco. Number one, okay, it's the espresso talking. So yeah, I learned from Sam about artists working in their own studio. So what I did was I had a portable studio fabricated, and I traveled all over the world with my portable studio printing with artists that I was interested in, and I would contact them. But after a while, the ball just kept rolling, and artists would introduce me to their friends, or else I'd just cold call them. And so I did. Bob Therian, though, he lived in LA, and I did this project with him, hand-colored prints. Got to know each other, and then he came in one day with a box of old-style Polaroids that he had done of installations in his studio. So the name of the book was Dream Hospital. His friend John Yao is a well-known New York writer, and poet and critic, and so it was a collaboration between John Yao and Therian. And so this picture here is really interesting. And now we're going to jump here, and you'll see that's the cover. And this is what it was. Okay, so this print is about 3 inches wide by about 6 inches tall, or maybe 2.5 inches wide by about 6 inches tall. So it's a photogravure, and it's of a little situation that Bob set up in his studio of a miniature bed that he built, a doll's bed, and then the saw is made out of sheet metal and foam rubber. And then the log is just a painted piece of scrap wood that he cut. And I just found it really interesting, his whole way of working, and this beautiful fantasy world that he created, and it could go from miniature to massive. I'm sure most people are interested, or rather familiar with his very large table installations that he's done, sharing table installations, but they kind of come out of this very personal, small work. So this was a very interesting project to do, and it kind of set me on my way to do more work. This is a print from a bound book by a Los Angeles artist, Ed Moses, and the reason I included it has to do with Aldo Kromelink, because when Kromelink visited me here in Santa Monica, in my studio, I showed him this print. I showed him all these San Francisco prints that were full color, and he said, yeah, they're pretty good. And then I showed him this, and he just was like, this is it. And he gave me a hug, and he called me his brother. So that was all I needed for validation for, Picasso's printer and all the great artists he worked with. So, so this is, technically it's very interesting because it's a white ground aqua tint that's been flat bit, and then there's been split bite aqua tint painted right on top of it with nitric acid. So there's a lot of different techniques going on. The reason the flat bite, the edge of those lines, those snake-like lines, was to give it a halation with the wall that an open bite will give to a print. to an etching. So I was very, very specific in the way we approached that. So that's from a bound book, Ed Moses. He died about 10 years ago. I did a couple of projects with him. Okay, this is a white ground aquatint by Peter Alexander, who is another LA artist who died. It's from a book called LAX, and he had a plane, and he would fly around Los Angeles and take photographs at night. And so this is from one of his photographs. What's interesting about it for anybody interested in technical stuff is most of the time white ground is etched in ferric chloride. By the way, white ground is an aquatint process that you can paint on layers. It's a mixture of titanium white pigment, ivory snowflakes, and linseed oil. I actually know the story of how it was invented, but I'm not going to go into that right now. But if anybody is interested who is a technician, during the Q&A, I will explain how the man came up with the particular formula. But what's interesting is because it wasn't etched in ferric chloride, but in Dutch mordant, which is a much stronger acid, it has a very, very particular kind of tonality within that cloud form that you would not normally get through ferric chloride. So one of the things I've done in this particular presentation is I've included book covers and portfolio covers. So this is a book cover where the material is cork with foil stamping on it. And the artist is an Israeli artist, Moshe Gershuni, who's also dead. And I liked his work very much. I was introduced to him by a museum curator from Tel Aviv. And he was an unusual guy. And I really liked working with him. And I thought the name of this book is Farewell. And it's sort of about the journey of the soul after death in his version. So I like how ambiguous it is. And it's a variety of different techniques. And sheen collé, which means it was printed on a thinner paper, usually a Japanese paper. In this case, it's Gampi paper. This is I threw this one in just as a one-off. I did a little book called Painting Lesson with another Israeli artist who I really liked because I thought these images would look really good in photogravure. And it's this little sculpture he did out of a hammer and a phonograph record. I found it to be very curious, and so it conformed to my open-ended aesthetic. This is a parchment. I don't see it very well. That's the reason I'm trying to see things. This is a cover for a Marina Abramovich project that I did. It was the first project I did with my portable studio. I went to Amsterdam and worked with her in her home studio there for 3 days. And it was just like the MoMA thing she did with the table, except it was just me and her for 3 days. And we did it, it was really great. We had a wonderful collaboration. And this is a print from it. She's a body artist, obviously, a performance artist. So that's one print from the project. And here's another one. And she was it's actually, she drew that with her fingernails. And this one here is spit bite. And she really liked that because it's a mixture of her saliva with nitric acid and painting that way, just on top of an aquatint. And that was the first time I used my portable aquatint box, which I took with me on subsequent trips around the world. Next trip was to Paris working with Rebecca Horn, whose work I absolutely loved, and she just passed last year, and she was a wonderful friend. I met her through Sam Francis in the early 90s when she had an exhibition at MoCA in LA that was a real knockout, and we became friendly then. And then I went to Paris and worked with her 4 times. And this paper that it's printed on, was very specific. She was an early body artist as well. So the paper is the actual handmade paper made through Hiromi Katayama of the color of her skin, and it's a transparent paper. And she hated prints because the image is reversed. And so I had a paper made through Hiromi, the color of her skin, of Rebecca's skin. And so that's, and then, so you're looking at it onto the verso from the recto, and you're seeing it on the back side showing through. So it's printing right reading the way she drew it. And she drew it with twigs, and she used a lychee nut, and she dragged a log across it. And it was the beauty of both hard ground and soft ground. And I had my portable aquatint box with me as well. That's a particularly nice print that she did. And so this book that she did, which was part book, part portfolio, was called Tailleur de Coeur, which means the tailor of the heart, and it was about open heart surgery. And so the text is something that she wrote about open heart surgery. And the images all correspond to the blood, because it's the color of her blood. We did a drawdown of her blood, and I had ink I mixed ink to the color of her blood, and it's printed on paper that's the color of her skin. So it's a very specific project. Rebecca was very enthused by this project, and so she just told me anybody I wanted to work with in Europe, she would introduce me to. And so I said, how about Janis Kunelis? And she said, I'll call you back in 10 minutes. And so she called me back and she said, yeah, he wants to work with you. So I went to Rome, and he doesn't speak English, and I don't speak Italian or Greek. So we had a wonderful collaboration, not having a common language. So that was the beauty of the portable studio. The whole deal on the portable studio was to work without a net. The thing about a print shop is it's a very prescribed environment. And so I just really wanted to kick the doors down on that. So I went to Rome, and this was bound in parchment, as was Marina's and a couple of these other projects. So working with Kunelis it was the dream project for me. So like, this is the first print we did, and he just took a flask of olive oil and poured it on a plate. And then I tried to do a ground on top of olive oil, which completely resisted, which he loved. And so it came out to be this weird open bite. And then he just took some nails and he started doing dry point with nails. And then he took a hammer and chisel and he started to beat on the plate with a mallet and chisels. And then he gave me the plate. Oh, by the way, here's the beauty of the whole thing, okay? Is I went and did all these projects and we never proofed anything. So yeah, we just went and made plates. And then I took them back to Santa Monica, and I made the prints there, and then I'd send them the proofs. And this seemed to work real well. It was a completely unorthodox approach. I was just really tired of the paradigm. I wanted to do something different. This is a really wonderful print by Kunelis. He went into his storeroom and came out with a chalice and a block of lead, and then with a burner on the floor, melted the lead, and he poured it on top of an aquatint, and then let it dry and peeled it off. And that's the pattern of the lead in the aquatint. And in the print, it's got exquisite detail. And by the way, this aquatint box I designed, it's just flawless, grainless aquatints. So for something like this, it works really well because it's all about the detail. And then when he saw that it worked real well, I put a hard ground on the plate, and he just wrote Piombo backwards, which is Italian for lead. So this is another Kunelis print where I didn't know what he was going to do. And he ran upstairs, and no, he went into his storeroom, and he came out with a plate of glass, and he put it in a newspaper, and he beat it with a hammer. And he poured the glass out onto a plate with a hard ground, and then he traced the shards of glass. And then he ran upstairs and he brought this thing down that looked like it was for rigging sails on a sailboat, and he trimmed his beard with it on top of a soft ground, and his beard hairs are in the soft ground, and then I etched it, and the hairs burned away, and so we have a combination of broken glass um, and the hairs of his beard. And then he finished it off with a nail, dry pointing across the nail. Anybody who's familiar with his wall pieces knows he uses a lot of verticality in his wall pieces. So one pictorial thematic running through this whole thing is the vertical lines that are primarily dry point, although occasionally he did a few things in soft ground and hard ground. There's the last Cunellis print. One I'm particularly fond of. He melted a big block of wax and poured it on the plate, and then I open bit it, and then he nailed the plate. After I cleaned it off, he nailed it to a table, a wooden table, and just had at it with a hammer and chisel, and just made these super deep gouges that I had to grind down with a grinder so that they wouldn't destroy the paper. And then he made these beautifully elegant dry point lines with with different tools. I mean, he used nails and he used etching needles and different things, but there's like 3 or 4 different tools in there that are just kind of embellishing it. You can see how some of them have a really nice dry point burr that echoes the burr from the hammer and chisel. Because he was, I mean, we're talking, the man was like beating on the plate with this mallet and chisel, not subtly. So now we're moving into some, oh no, this is the last one. See, I'm showing you a lot of Cunellis because it's my favorite project, which gives you an idea of my aesthetic. You know, this is what I really wanted to do. So this is a white ground etching, a white ground aquatint rather. And then the guy just went literally ape on this plate with needles and hammers and mallets and just totally dug it out. And it made this a great, beautiful network of deep lines, deep dry point lines on top of an aquatint. And it's really very subtle and elegant. And so it was a 12 print project and really one of the high points of my life. So this isn't chronological. A couple of years later, I went to London. I worked with Anish Kapoor. This is a dyed parchment now. Rachel was showing us some upstairs, some parchment from somebody in upstate New York, and he's the guy who did the dyeing on this. I can't remember his name, but he dyed the parchment on this, and this was 2/3 of the edition was portfolio, and 1/3 was a limited edition book. But the book was this deep red and deep blue dyed parchment. There's a couple of prints from this portfolio in it. I happen to like that one a lot. You know, he has his sculptural practice is so varied, and this project kind of gave him a chance to stretch out into a different area he hadn't really worked in pictorially. And he used one brush for this whole project, and it was a small brush, and the mop was about maybe 6 inches long, and it came to this very fine point. So he could really lay down a lot of material. These are all white ground aquatints. And he could lay down a lot of material and go from a very, very wide base to these very, very fine lines, which was a really very thoughtful way to work. This is another print by him. It just so happened that at the same time, there was a William Blake retrospective at the Tate. And so there was a lot of Blake in the air. Plus, Kapoor's studio was on Lambeth Road, and one of Blake's studios was on Lambeth Road. So there was just a kind of a spiritual correspondence between certain kinds of Blake imagery and what Kapoor was trying to get at. And by the way, there is a Blake show coming up at the Morgan next year, which obviously everybody should go to see, because Blake's prints are so varied. And if you look at his early small prints that are just these really perfect line etchings, and the way they're etched and the way they're drawn, And then you look at the later work that, that's hand done, and he came up with this particular way of working with rolling out over an open bite. And it's such an incredible trajectory. His lifetime practice, which of course he was trained as an engraver as a young man because he was so talented. So anyway, this brings to mind a contemporary take on that quest. This is my favorite print of the Kapoor portfolio. I personally had a name for it, Rembrandt's Soup, and but it's a beautiful white crowned aqua tint, and very different than anything else you might see by him. And another aspect that I tried to encourage as a publisher and as a printer was that artists did not have to stick to a signature style. I really felt it was okay to just do something that you never did before, the kind of imagery that you'd never done before, take some chances. And I always said to artists, the first thing when we started, even if I'd never met him, I said, the most important thing to do is to embrace failure. It's really okay if we get nothing. Then I was fortunate to work with Giuseppe Pannone. What's really cool about this particular box is that it's tree bark, and the binding is snakeskin, because the binding strip, because he did these amazing cast glass pieces out of molted snakeskin that he found on his property. So I did this project in Turin at his home, which is in the foothills of the Alps, I guess. I don't know, or some mountains, but I think it's the Alps. I'm just going to get a throat lozenge here to help me out. I really admire, well, first of all, the whole Art Povera thing for me was it. All of those people. I mean, Luciano Fabro, Calzolari, Pannone, Cunellis, Mario Meritz, Marissa Meritz. It was such a unique period, and it was so much about that particular place and that particular culture. And I just felt a great attraction to this work. So to get to work with both Cunellis and Pannone was a really big deal to me. So this is a kind of a classic Pannone image. It's super simple. It's just spit, bite, and dry point. And it's his body, a body orifice with a tree growing out of it. The name of the project is, and I don't know Italian, but it translates as Footprints on Mulberry Treetops. So it's all about, like all of his work is, most of his work is, or a body of his work is, his body and nature. So that's what this work is about. I just love the simplicity of this. Also, to give you a dimensional size, this is about a 7-inch tall by about a 4-inch wide plate. This is a lift ground, white ground aqua tint, a cross section of the human brain with a brain stem. This is the bone that's at the base of the spine, connecting the spine to the neck. And it also reads as a leaf. I wish I had this print here for you to look at in person, because the detail is just lovely. This wonderful. One of the things that attracted me to this format and this way of working and working monochromatically is just the whole issue of detail and the history of detail and etching. You know, again, going back to engraving, going back to Dürer, going back to the master of the playing cards, going way back into the 1400s, coming all the way through, you know, and then how about 18th and 19th century engraved portraiture from Europe? right? How about the borders in that particular genre? So it references, to be able to work that references that quality of history was something I really wanted to do. And these artists were up for it. Last print by Pannone is this little guy sitting there whose spine is a feather. And the feather is soft ground. And then he drew the little, legs and the feet and the little head. And that's very much of a Giuseppe Pannone image, the intersection of our world, our human world, and the natural world. Not that we're not the natural world. It makes me think of one of my former teachers, Frederick Sommer, a great photographer at California College of Arts and Crafts, who lectured there, who said, people talk about a return to nature. I wonder where they could have been. So then I got to there was this mid-career survey exhibition at MoCA in LA of Gabriel Orozco's work that completely flattened me, because his work had just about the broadest spectrum of interests that I had encountered. And it was also intellectually driven, and at the same time so visceral. So I worked from obsession to obsession, and so I became pretty obsessed with the guy and his work. I was very fortunate. I worked with a lot of artists who showed with Marion Goodman, and so through the gallery I got to meet him, and then we got to spend some time together. I worked with him over a period of 2 years, and he had this installation. The first project we did, this is from the first project we did was based on an installation he did that's now in the collection of the Modern. It was called Lintels, and it was clothes dryer lint that was hung on fishing line across the gallery. So we made etchings, soft ground etchings of clothes dryer lint. And it was a really interesting process, because we would peel this lint off of screens from clothes dryers, and we went to all different kinds of clothes dryers. And we went to pet grooming places. I mean, all industrial places. And anyway, what's interesting about this is, one of the things that's interesting about it, the detail. If you're actually looking at the print and you get in there with a loop, or you get in there with some magnification, the amount of detail we were able to pull out of these things is really very, very special. But to print it flat just didn't work. So all of these things are 2-plate prints. One plate is just plate tone, and then the soft ground is printed on top of it, and that's printed on Gampi paper. So it has a very, very rich, palpable surface. Here's another. By the way, these are all random. The purpose of this thing was that these things would just be random. They're not composed. We would, just take some dryer lint, put it on there, make an impression in the soft ground. It wasn't so devil may care. I mean, everything had to be planned out, but the actual making of the image was spontaneous. Then I went down to Buenos Aires. I worked with Guillermo Cuitca on a project called Puro Teatro, Pure Theater, which was a series of etchings and aquatints of interior of London theaters as seen from the stage. And this is a project I have that you can actually see the prints of afterwards if you like, by Mona Hatoum. So Mona, I visited her in London when I was working with Kapoor, and then she visited me in Santa Monica at my studio, and we talked about it, and she said what she wanted to do is a project with her hair. Now, it would be so darn easy to just take your hair and make like a photo engraving or a photo etching of it, but it's not going to satisfy me. So what we did was we made, soft ground etchings of her hair. When I showed up at her studio in Berlin with my studio, she had made on a couple of work tables, had about 20 pieces of 8.5 by 11, and each one had a pile of hair that she arranged into a drawing that we transferred carefully to a soft ground. And then we, made it. I always traveled with a pastry roller, a marble pastry roller, and that was able to. We still have it. It's my wife who's here. That was her pastry roller, and so I use that for making an impression. But here's the story, okay? Anybody, I know there's a couple of printers here. You're probably wondering, how could you make a impression of something as fine as human hair on a soft ground without rupturing the ground and making pressure, right? Well, I don't know where the idea came from, but I thought, and you can feel free to use this, silicone release spray. So I sprayed wax paper with silicone release spray, and then I was able to get these perfect impressions and was able to etch it, get really, really, clean plates. However, because I wanted to, so she did these rubbings of kitchen utensils on this Japanese wax paper that unfortunately one can't get anymore. It was called Masa wax paper, and I was able to get through Hiromi. And so we wanted to have the quality of the hair that you could see, but it would kind of disappear and it would be part of the paper. So I printed it in a whitish gray ink on top of whitish gray Masa wax paper. But I couldn't steel plate the plates because the thing about the silicone release spray is once it gets into the plate, you can't get it out. I tried every solvent known to mankind to clean the plates. And so I had to print like this grayish white very carefully because I couldn't steel plate the plates. But I was able to do it and printed it on this wax paper and printed chincolle, which was another thing because, wax paper like rejects the glue. So it was a very interesting technical challenge, and which was achieved through trial and error. But, that's why we play the games. I don't know what that is. We saw some work by Wangeshe Mutu over a period of about a year, and this was in like 2002 or 2003. So I was able to work with her before she was that well known. And so this is zebra wood, and the name of the project is Eve. And so that's the box it came in. Like I said, I've never shown the boxes before in a slideshow, but I thought it might be interesting. This is one of the prints from it. It's a combination of a collage with a digital photograph and etching aqua tint. So it wasn't what I anticipated we would do, but it's what she wanted to do. And it came out very, very nicely. John Baldessari was my neighbor. We lived close to each other, and his studio was across the street from mine, so I saw him all the time. And this is the first project I did with him. There's only one print from it, but as you can see, the box is in a cruciform. Half the prints were vertical, half the prints were horizontal, and they overlapped each other in the box. And here's one of the prints. They were photogravure and letterpress. John and Rebecca Horn both kind of became my angels. And John he's like, you got to work with Chris Burden. And then he told me who else, I'm calling my friends, you got to work with these people. And Rebecca did the same thing. So Chris did this. Chris lived in Topanga. Obviously, Chris died like 10 years ago. But he lived in Topanga for about 25 years. And for the first 15 years or so, he lived with his wife, Nancy Rubens, the sculptor, in a tent. And he had a lot of encounters with coyotes. And so when he came to my studio, he said he had this idea for a project. Am I going too long? A few more minutes? We're almost done. Anyway, so he had a lot of encounters with coyotes, and he wanted to write them up. And so the question was, how would we illustrate them? And so he didn't want to have any images of coyotes. He thought that would be disrespectful. So that's his cat up in a tree, and that and behind his house. But it relates to the name of the particular essay or short piece he wrote. Is called Black Trash Bag, because he thought it was a trash bag in a tree, but with his cat. And it's basically describing life in Topanga, and what he did there over the years. This is a project I did with Matt Mulliken, who John Baldessari also introduced me to. And it's called 8 Dead Twos in a Wooden Box. That person did it, not me, not me, not me, not Matt Mulliken. And Matt did this project under hypnosis. And it's these very stylized twos. This is a large print for me. These prints are like, 18 tall by 14 wide. And so, but what's interesting about him is he wanted to, originally they were just these paste ups on graph paper and legal pad, but we blew up the legal pad and the graph paper to be twice its size, and then trimmed it down. And then I printed the aqua tint and the soft brown on top. And so it's actually a double sheen collé of on surface Gampi paper. That one is printed with the graph paper, and one is printed with the legal pad. Here's another one. They get pretty out. And again, he did this under hypnosis, so it was a rather unusual project. A painter who I've admired for years because the work is so just darn quirky is Jonathan Lasker. And so I did a series of prints with him. This is straight up etching in aqua tint. This is an interesting series. It's with James Welling, and it's a combination of aqua tint and photo engraving. He did, he cut black mat board, and he lit it in different ways, and then he altered it in his computer, and then he added some shadow, some drop shadows, and then he made sharp edges. And then I made photo engraving plates and printed it on top of a light gray aqua tint. That's another one. They're larger than I usually did. The plate size was about 14 by 12. This is with Barry LeVay, and I'd love for you to see the whole series, but you're only going to see this one print. So he did a lot of sculptural installations based on electrical diagrams. So the name of the series is Voltage, and it's actually a round, which means you put it on a wall, and the last print goes right back into the first print, and it's a linear movement from print to print. It was very important to him sculpturally that the image was off to the right-hand side, that the borders weren't even, so it gave motion in both directions. And he was an absolute pleasure to work with. Cristina Iglesias, the project is up here, great Spanish sculptor. This is a combination of photographs she did that's printed digitally through of a mock-up of a room-size installation that's actually a tabletop model that she shot through a macro lens combined with etching, dry point, and spit bite aqua tint. Andrea Zittel, the famous plywood cactuses in Death Valley that don't exist. But it was a wonderful project called Rules of Raw. And again, nice, and that's in the collection here as well. I worked with Barry McGee. We worked on scrap copper, all dry point with interesting kind of Gampi collages and decorative paper collages. This is another Barry McGee dry point. These plates are, I don't know, 6 tall, 4 inches wide. Do we have something there? Oh yeah, this is I see. Again, I apologize for my poor vision. Rita McBride, just really nice based on one of her sculptures. Super evanescent. This is 4 plates on top of each other. Charlene Von Hale, aqua tint and dry point. And the dry point tool she used was a 16-penny nail, so it's really, really gnarly. That's another print by her from the same portfolio, which is called Black Sun, which is a homage to the Black Sun Press in Paris in the 1920s. And this is based on a Mayan mask. Meredith Monk, a artist, multidisciplinary artist I've admired since early 80s. I wanted to work with a composer, and she was open to working with me. I knew that she probably made very interesting musical notation. This is a younger British artist, although he's probably in his mid-40s now, named David Musgrave. The reason I included it is because all of those lines are straight lines, and it's one etch, and it's all done through the pressure of his hand. So this little figure that he calls a reverse golem is, it's just really interesting technically. That it's just line after line after line, but the image is created solely through the pressure of his hand. An artist that has a show up right now that's closing that I really have liked, I did 2 projects with, is a Spanish painter, Juan Usle. And after we did our first project, which came out really beautifully, he called me up a few years later, and he said, I have these photographs, and I have no idea what to do with them. Can I just send them to you and you figure it out? So, okay. And so there's a river behind his house, and he took these photographs of a river. It's called the Pisuena River in the north of Spain. And I just think they're lovely. And so I said, yeah. So I just printed them straight, digitally, and then mounted them, printed them on Surface Gampi. No, actually, I printed them on 100-gram Hahnemühle proofing paper, and then mounted them on 500-gram Somerset. And it's just a beautiful series of these reflections. So, you can't be wed to just one technique. This is Liza Liu, and she did these projects in South Africa. And we sent the place back and forward to Durban, South Africa on DHL. And so she would send me plates, and I'd send her plates, and that's the way we worked. Julião Sarmento, every place that he ever lived in Lisbon, Portugal. All the diagrams and photographs of the houses that he took and apartments that he lived in from his birth till his death. Tom Sachs, Space Project. There's the space shuttle. These guys really meant a lot to me. Gert Nuve Tobias. And went to Cologne and worked with them. There's a combination of techniques, but that's straight up white ground aqua tint. Yes, that is as well. I like how disturbing they are. Are we done? No, Miroslav Balka. He came and collected footprints of homeless people. And we walked around Santa Monica with soft ground plates and just made footprints of the homeless. What's that? Oh, Ed Richet, Blank Signs. Matthew Monahan, Homage to Durer, another one. This portfolio is here. Arturo Herrera, combination of reconstructed color Xeroxes of an antique book mixed with photo engraving. And the guy that I worked with most, you're only going to see one print by him, Christopher Wool. And this is a great relationship. And we did 5 portfolios together and a number of individual prints. And I think we were both very pleased with working together. So that's the end of it. Oh, here's the last one. That's another Christopher Wool from a different portfolio from 2016. So thank you for your patience. And
Thank you. That was absolutely fascinating. I know we're going to have some questions in the Q&A and at the reception afterwards. Let me just switch over. Great. So I'm happy to introduce our second speaker today, Kiki Smith, who has been known since the 1980s for her multidisciplinary work that explores embodiment in the natural world. She uses a broad variety of materials to continuously expand and evolve the body of work that includes sculpture, printmaking, photography, drawing, and textiles. Smith has been the subject of numerous solo exhibitions worldwide, over 25 in museums, as well as more than I could count in galleries and other venues. Her work has been featured at 5 Venice Biennials. She is a member of the American Academy of Arts and Letters and the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. And in 2017, she was awarded the Honorary Royal Academician by the Royal Academy of Arts in London. In 2006, she was recognized by Time magazine as Time 100, the people who shape our world. Other awards include the Scogan Medal for Sculpture in 2000, the 2009 Edward McDonald Medal, and the 2010 Nelson Rockefeller Award for Purchase College of Arts, and the 2013 U.S. Department of State Medal of Arts conferred to her by Hillary Clinton. And a 2016 Lifetime Achievement Award from the International Sculpture Center. She is an adjunct professor at NYU in Columbia, and I hope you all will welcome Kiki Smith.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for your talk. It's so, I know like the printers in this room, and I'm sure paper people, like it's such a deep love affair with something that's, that has so many different aspects to it, but then there's also the people in it are so nerdy in a way. Like we're so fascinated by details of things that are, that make your life beautiful. And, you know, I was asked to talk, and I'm very happy to be paired together. And also because I thought, oh, they asked to talk about collaboration. And, you know, I thought for me, I'll push these things, but, you know, one of the best things about my life has been working with people. I don't have enough electricity in my body to change things.
Make sure I set it up correctly when you left.
But you know, that really, I've had good friends and a couple of visitors in my life, and now a husband. But for me, working with printmakers and working in foundries and working with glassblowers and people have really been.
I'm going to interrupt you for just a sec so we can get your slides to work.
Oh, I can just do it with that. That's good. I can do it with that. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can do it that either way. I like these things actually more than that. Yeah, that it's really been the joy of my life is collaborating with people, and particularly collaborating with people that know more than I do, because I know very little. I went to like a hippie free school. High school, I went to trade school for baking afterwards, and then I went to like a year and a half to college and moved to New York. But I asked my assistant to put slides together, and it's not in any chronological order, I don't think, or in any particular order, but he did put in, I thought, oh yeah, I did make things in paper, you know, because I thought, oh, what do I know about paper? But when I first came to New York, I made things in muslin, and then I used a lot of cardboard from the streets to make sculpture. But then I started, at some point when I was a child, we had Japanese paper balloons for Christmas, and I thought, oh, I can make bodies like that. And so I started just cutting and pasting, you know, with gampi and methyl cellulose. And you could kind of put it on your fingers like gloves, and you could take other parts and make things. And that was one. But I don't, yeah, these were ones, because they were, there was a thing from Aquinas about the body being separated from the matter, and then I had this idea that you could just be these like ghost presences in the room and the blood separate. But so I did do that for a while, and I didn't, I took once a class when I came to New York, a friend of mine taught at the Lower East Side print shop. So I took a class in photo etching. And here was it. I'll put the timer on so I don't talk too much. So yeah, I took a class, but then that was sort of the end of it. And I was very influenced when I was young by Bread and Puppet Theater, who did a lot of woodcut, big masonite, enormous woodcut printing on cloth and on and on paper, making posters, and that sort of populism of printmaking was very engaging to me. And I don't know when. Oh, I asked a friend of mine, Charlie Ahern, who was a filmmaker. I was in this group called 11. We had a store at Times. We had this show in Times Square, and we had a store. And I said I wanted to make T-shirts for it, commemorative T-shirts. And so he taught me how to silk screen. And then I started making scarves, and I worked in a bar at the time in Times Square. And so I would sell my scarves and T-shirts at the bar. And then like every show or something that we did, I'd make like commemorative shirts and stuff like that. And then so from silk screening, I started making my own prints. I could make them at home on the floor and on the table. And from that, Bill Goldston, I was in the Brooklyn Museum used to have shows like a biennial, and they invited me into that. I made this big panel of pictures of fetuses like that were in this Japanese anatomical book I had, and Bill Goldston saw it, and he wanted to come see me and asked me, and I had no idea who he was at all. And I actually showed at a print gallery, but Joe Falbush, but he came, and I was like, I had pigeons in my house. I was trying to get some kids to take the pigeons because I had too many pigeons. And he came, and I was like really paranoid, and was like, no, I don't want to go. Like, I don't know who you are. I don't want to go anywhere. And he somehow, he gave me books about fairy tales and stuff. So he caught me. But so I went and I started making print stuff. But this I had made earlier. I made a book of hours. And I just did different fluids in the body over and over again for every day of the year. And then I made jars like that. And also for me, like my father was the sculptor, Tony Smith, sculptor and artist and architect. And we made, I grew up making paper models for my father, my sisters and I, like I think American Paper Corporation made die cut pieces of octahedrons and tetrahedrons, and we would spend like after school for months making them and taping them, and then we'd sit on the floor. My father would tell us how to put them together. And I see that a lot of my work comes from that. Like, and I didn't know it. Somebody said it to me that knew my father, like, oh, you're just doing the exact same thing. You're like, just taking things and taking something and then turning it and making it into one thing or another over and over and over again. Like, which I think printmaking or lots of things is just about turning things over and looking at them. But also this thing of generating things from paper and generating a lot of stuff. So a lot of my paper things, the genesis is in paper, and then it goes into textile or sculpture or some other form. This was one of the first prints I made before ULAE2. I made, my father died, and I went to Mexico, and first I just made things about death when my father died, but then I made this of how I know I'm here, and they were just linoleum cuts because I had seen processional prints like from the 1700s or 1600s of, court processional prints. I was so fascinated by them. So I'd made these, and I only just cut the line because I was too lazy to do it the real way. And we made, Judith Solotkin printed them, but then nobody, this stopped working too. Then nobody wanted them, so we didn't really publish them for about 10 years later. No, it doesn't work again. Oh, okay, we'll see. And then this was actually the print after that. I was called Possessions 9/10 of the Law, and it was, I drew different organs, and then I was printing them, and in silk screening, everything always comes out bad, pretty much, especially when you're doing it on like the floor or something. But it was the moment when Malcolm McLaren and Vivienne Westwood had made their sort of punk series of they were designing what punk looks like and making their pirate clothes and all these things. And they would keep all of that chatter and noise and bad printing. And I thought, like, yeah, I don't have to be stopped with it either. So then I would flood the screen and then wipe it afterwards and then print it. So it was like a mono print or monotype, and with this matrix. And then the same, like this was a print at ULAE, where I had made it first at the Lower East Side print shop. I'd been a key holder, but it was a little big for me. It was like 6 feet by 3 feet or something like that. But I made this drawing from this anatomical book, and then later I copied that. I laid that on the floor and copied that and made a sculpture out of it. And so a lot of my work has had that trajectory, I guess. And this was the first print I made at ULAE, because Bill Goldston said, just come by yourself with no preconceived idea, just with yourself. And that totally freaked me out. I had no idea what I was doing. And then, but I came with myself, but I brought some alginate, some dental casting plaster. And then we cast mold, we cast the dental casting plaster and then made transfers onto lithoplate, onto stones. And then also I put my hair in the Xerox machine. And I was very interested in unfolding the body. So that's maybe the nicest print I still ever made, but these were more other things. That was another print at ULAE. Yeah, I guess at this time I was making a lot of paper sculptures. And then I had a friend who was getting his house fixed and upstate, and then these guys left all these porno magazines of women lactating, and I was really interested in orifices. Like my work when I was young was all orifices, so I took them and degenerated the images from the magazine and made them into Xeroxes, and then made these into silk screen, and then painted on them. But also I was really into this idea that you could reactivate. A lot of things I made at that time, you could reactivate the ink. I put methylcellulose, I'd put color and methylcellulose together. And then these were prints that I made at ULAE that we'd be making some other print, and then I'd be bored because we were doing lithography, like we were doing the other one, the Banshee pearls. So I'd put my bosoms down on the Xerox machine and make them. And because I loved Eva Hess, and I thought she was abstracting the body, and then I was putting it back in the body, but it was more like I was making drawings of the moon. And then I made them all three-dimensional. And then this came out of that also. I had them take pictures of me. I wanted to make a puppet's head and take pictures of me from all different sides, so then I could put that together like a balloon. But because of that, no, that's another one. yeah, because of that, we went, Craig Zamiello saw this camera that was made by Shell Oil to photograph cores, and it was at the British Museum. And so Bill and Craig Zamiello and I, we went to London, and we made this print called My Blue Lake. So the camera shutter moved across the film slowly, and for me, I turned around on a Lazy Susan at the same time. So it made this unfolded body, because a lot of my work was that at the time. And then these were prints that I made. And what I really liked about ULAE was that like I'd have some idea and start doing some print, and then it would just like disappear. And then I sort of got it, like if Bill didn't think it was really going anywhere, it would just disappear away. And, then sort of go in a little bit different direction. This is much later. This is making prints of kidneys from potatoes, because I thought it's so funny that people make potato prints. And so I made them, and it was leaf on it. And I also, because I came from making things like these prints at home, making everything, and I think I'm still making things at home primarily. But I like this idea that you could just print things and then use them additively to make all different kinds of things. This is ULAE. And this was a book here that I made with May Bersenberger, who's one of my heroes and changed my life a great deal and moved me more towards making things about nature or something. And she's also married to the great American artist and really great American printmaker, Richard Tuttle, who's one of my big heroes in printmaking. But this was a book we made, and we made it. I didn't know her. I knew Richard. Richard worked with my father when I was a child. And then May called and asked if I would work with her. And I went to New Mexico, because where I worked anyway, as in a foundry. And then we just started talking. And then we made this book about the endocrine system. And I cut it out. I cut out drawings that I inked up and printed on paper. And then from that, we were going to make photo litho. But I did it once the entire, and then then we had the text, and we had that, and we printed on paper and then glued it down in the book. But I lost it once, all the drawings. And then then I remade them. And then May came to New York, and then we took the train to ULAE, and I left them on the train and lost it twice. And May asked me if I really wanted to do this project, like whether I had ambivalence. And then I thought, well, sometimes you have to prove it that you really want to do so. Like sometimes, so this was the third version. And then we made this book at Rutgers University in New Jersey. We made this book, Concordiance. And this was also, was writing and then pochoir prints. Because, for me, I'm learning on the job. I don't know any, I didn't study printmaking. I didn't study much of anything. And I've learned mostly from going to the print fairs, which have been the most invaluable thing. And then also from working in print shops, because I would at ULAE, I would look under the tables. Like they would only have one artist at a time, but I would always look under the tables and, see Terry Winters, who worked with Cromling, and then Tip Dunham, and different printmakers, and they all knew so many. These were made on tobacco paper, which you use for their tattoo transfer prints. But then I took something like taking those drawings, and then I worked at Corning, and we made vases, and a man from Austria did the engraving, but then I went with diamond Dremel and drew on it, because I'm used to that from printmaking. And he said that people never did work in glass engraving that way. That it was a very strange way to be working, incising lines. And so, but it was really, it was a nice collaboration. And then this is the same thing, like I went to Pittsburgh to the big museum there, and I can't remember. And I drew, I had this idea about white animals, and white animals disappear. They're in the snow. They're either to be white to be dangerous or to be disappear. And then I made all these prints, but then I laid the prints on paper again and made sculptures from them. This was Greg Burnett, who I worked with. I only made this one print with him, but I enjoyed working with him very much. It was for AIDS benefit. And then these were giveaway. Yeah, also for me, the thing that printmaking, you can give it away. You can make presents out of it. You can wrap packages in it. Like you can just generate a whole bunch of things, and it can have all different lives. To me, is very interesting. And this one on the left, this was a book I made with Anthony Dauphin, but I asked Maurice Sanchez, someone put me in contact with him, and then I asked him where I could make etchings, because I worked at ULAE, and you would make about one print a year. And I realized I got to a point where I needed to learn about etching. I had done a couple of things, but I really needed to learn more. And then this at some point, Santa Fe had an arts thing that they used to do, and they asked me to make a benefit print for them. And so I started making rubber stamp prints. And since then I've made a lot. I like making giveaway prints or things that for benefits and so, like I could make a whole book just of benefit prints. This is ULAE. And then this is ULAE. That print I like. I like that print. That was like, I studied baking, so it's like challah, like drawing the grades. That I don't like. This print I like because I got asked in '94 to go to Alfred University, and I could do ceramics, glass, and printmaking. And so I started, a janitor had dead birds. So I started drawing dead birds that he had. And we did big photo etchings on, because I drew everything life size. And then photo litho. And so I went to Alfred, and then I went to Mass College of Art, and I stayed there about 6 weeks, and I went to Harvard and drew all these animals there, but I would draw them in section on Arch's cover paper, and then we'd break the plates up like that. And this was printed all on Nepalese, Himalayan paper. But and still, like, I'm using these images since 1994, basically. But working in colleges changed my life, because they were like, this was the deer is from my plates at Harvard, but then the drawing I drew, and we made photolithos at Columbia University, and students would print. And then from that drawing, I made the sculptures. And then from the same drawings, I made tapestries, working with Magnolia Editions in Oakland, California. And then from that, I made them into, mosaics for the train station here. This was a benefit for artist space. This was my worst one, because I made this for the Pollock Krasner house. And they asked me, and Jackson Pollock and Lee Krasner, but Jackson was one of my father's best friends, and my parents were very close to them. And I somehow thought like, what was the stupidest thing I could do? Because I grew up only with abstract art, and I actually much prefer abstraction. Like when I look at Jacob's prints, I think, oh fuck, why can't I make things more abstract? But I just, so this was, but this was with leaf, was litho with leaf. And then I had a cat and my cat died. And so this is when I started working with Harlan and Weaver, and my cat died, and I wrapped her up in, or him up in the basket on my bicycle because I lived close to them. And I went down there and I traced him on a plate. And I took a lot of photographs, and then I brought the cat home, buried him in the backyard. But then I made this print. And Felix worked with Louise Bourgeois doing engraving. And, you know, I was like, I had no real experience doing etching, and I was really a nitwit. And he, the first thing he did was he said, you can only etch on one plate and do aquatint on the other plate, because he didn't trust me to put them both on the same plate at the same time. But also because I'm not that good at drawing and stuff, like this is probably 27 plates, and probably at 24 it was okay, but, or maybe 20, but then I had to go back and erase. But then I started learning to use a burnisher and a scraper, and to me they're my best friends. And that's the same, that's a drawing I made at that same time with me with my dead cat as a pieta. And then these are more recent. At Columbia, I started making laser cut prints of cats and birds and stuff. And then these are then rubbings and then painting on them. But then I also made them into sculptures and painted them. And then also scanned that and blew it up big for a fancy housing project in Milan. That's Bill Goldston working here. Oh, I made drawings after Lewis Carroll from Alice Underground. This one and another one, and then they were hand colored. You know, because also there were a group of prints called the Lubeck prints, and maybe there was a show here. I think it probably was here, not the Modern Museum, but like 30 years ago. And I had that book where you have these lots of woodcut prints about the weather and about strange phenomena and things, but then they're hand colored very crudely, and I really loved that. That's another one of me being a witch and the senses. That's another. That one I like. That print I like. Oh yeah, but see, from that, I made that, and then I made that. You know, so it's a kind of weird. That one I don't like. And then these James and Alexandra Brown, who had a press in Mexico. They invited me to Carpe Diem. They made rugs with people, but they also, they're very good printers in Oaxaca, Fernando Sandoval, and they invited me to make prints there. And it was the same thing. They just said, come. And I didn't really, they knew all my friends very well, but I didn't know them. And so I went, and then, you know, these were just their dogs lying around in the yard. And then, you know, I went with this Little Red Riding Hood stuff I was interested in for a while. But that's the same like wolf print from the original print, but drawn into clay. Yeah, at a certain point, I started drawing in clay and then pulling waxes off of that. And that's still primarily how I make sculpture now. And then that's that same wolf, but made into a tapestry. Yeah, that has photographic parts and hand drawn. These are with Magnolia editions. That's a Don Farnsworth. These are the first aquatints I made with Harlan and Weaver, and where I had to set plates separate. You know, I just made drawings of girls from. There used to be really great books that were Dover books that were filled with pictures, and they were given to you copyright free. You know, so you could just make, I mean, these weren't, that wasn't, the Wolf Girl wasn't, that one wasn't, but the other ones were. And this was one with Carpe Diem. And also the French fold like this, which I learned from Benjamin Franklin, from an exhibition of Benjamin Franklin. Like that has been something also immensely that changed my life. And that also I've taught. So I've been teaching etching at NYU since the late 80s. I think I taught drawing first, and then I started teaching printmaking, which I knew nothing about. And then I started teaching at Columbia in about 2000. And I would like ride my bike on the way to school and call up Harlan and Weaver, ask them how to do things, or in the middle of the class, ask them how to do things. And then the students would complain that I didn't know what I was doing. That I was asking people, and I thought they're learning the best thing they could ever learn. That if you're an artist, you can ask somebody else how to do something. That's more important. I mean, these were done at Pace Editions, and it was a joke. I don't know. It was a joke about grids, and I said it was called "What Girls Know About Grids," and it was just pictures of me, like as a yucky kid, and crying, and it was for Leslie Gore. And then these are one of the few mezzotins I made that were little, but then I made glass flowers from them. This was just me being obnoxious that made flower farts. And then this was a benefit print also. So it was the first maybe color litho that I did, where I drew on, I took a picture, and then we made color separations of the picture, and then I drew on acetate. And I like that working like that. I like CMYK a lot. Those are photographic versions. And then when my mother died, I made these flowers, like we're Catholic, so everyone gave flowers, and then there were all these dead flowers in the house, so that this time I brought all the dead flowers to Harlan and Weaver and drew them, and that was one of the first real color etchings that I made that I was happy with. And then this is Harlan and Weaver also. And I think already by this time that teaching at NYU, I teach with a friend, Valerie Hammond, who's a very good printmaker and has taught printmaking for 40 or 50 years. And when I just taught by myself, I just do it and I give demonstrations. And then somehow when she came, I thought, oh, we're not doing this anymore. We're making our own work in class with the students. And I thought, I was raised in an art studio or art house, like we worked for my father our whole lives. And I thought, like, it's really good for students to see that you have something invested in what you're doing. Like, they can't just be wasting your time all the time, like not caring. Like I would say, like, our lives are at stake. And so I started making prints. We get one sheet of copper plate each semester. And so normally I cut it up and make little prints, but it started, this is the one whole sheet, but we started making prints during teaching. And I would say for a great deal of the last 20 years, I've been mostly making my own plates, which has real downsides because, I'm pretty elementary in knowing what I'm doing, but it's been really wonderful too. I was invited to Ann Arbor, Michigan, and I made these prints. I just thought of I don't know, it was fall, and I thought, what's the stupidest thing you can do, kind of? And I thought, oh, I could make a cornucopia, or make prints with nuts and things. And I thought, nobody, you have no control over what you're doing. Things just come like Ignace and Crazy Cat and hit you on the head and tell you to do it. But I thought, one of the really great things about making prints and about making art in general is that, you know, just doing something is just like an impetus. It's like something, mosquito biting you. But then it's the time that it takes to make it that things reveal themselves to you and teach you how it wants to be. You know, like for me, I always say you have to be following your work. That's much earlier. That's much earlier. Oh, but yeah, and these I made in the early 90s or something. But then I made that with those blue girls. And then I wanted to make a picture for my neighborhood. But then I was embarrassed, I guess. And I took out the whole, you know, this was also because of Kath Ann Brown making her books for teaching printmaking, which have been enormously invaluable to students and to myself. And I thought like I could learn something along the way. And so I taught myself how to make soap ground, which is like the white ground. And I love it. I love it. So these were that other print, but then I stopped them out again and open bit the whole background so it would go away. And one was 3 color. They're both 3 color, but one are blacks, one are grays, and one are that. I was working with Joe Shearer and Jesse at Alfred University, as they invited me to make my first digital print. And they showed me, and there was a place in San Diego you could go to the zoo, and you would lie down and they would superimpose like this leopard licking you. So I brought that photograph, and then they just, you know, they just leave. Like Alfred University is like you're completely isolated. There's nothing to do, and so they just like leave you in this room with this computer. And I'd never used a computer, but I made this print like I'd, you know, make my teeth blacker and stuff, like screw it up. But they never told me how to turn off the computer. So at 1 o'clock at night, I was in a lot of trouble. But and then the Modern Museum, when they were out in Queens, Wendy Whiteman asked me if I wanted to make a show. And she said, the pitch was I could have a billboard. And I thought, that's really an exciting idea, which of course never happened. But I thought of Rousseau's paintings of, you know, the different animals, the leopard attacking the woman, different things, and the antelope attacking the antelope, or different things. And I wanted to make these prints like that because I don't know, I was in some trip about like how you can get out of a body. And I thought lots of things are eaten alive to get out, you know, but so I made those. And then these were prints that I made in Oaxaca at James and Alexandra Brown. And they had, James had some children, and he would go out into the, they had like a hacienda, and so they're all farms, and he'd find all these dead animals and stuff, and he put them in big old pickle jars filled with formaldehyde. Like you could just go buy formaldehyde or go buy alcohol or something, and he'd put them in. So we had these jars of just these weird, like animals, like the snake and the rabbits together. And so I made a book with Susanna Moore, and that book was very nice because it was text, all printed, and then, but I tipped in the prints because I thought I wanted that if somebody wanted to take them out, they could. Normally I'd be totally against that, but with this, I wanted to do it. And these are other wacky prints I made. That's horrible print. Horrible. This is Uala'i, 2 drawing on, like it was printed, I drew on a print, and then we printed that, and then I drew on that, you know, hand coloring. And these are these woodcuts, that then rubbing the woodcuts. Because then they came originally from making cyanotypes, because one student taught the class how to do cyanotype, because everybody was into cyanotype about 10 years ago. And I was mad because the students just were taking things from the computer. And so I said, why don't you get plexiglass and etch and draw into the plexi and cut that and then make cyanotypes from your own drawings? And I don't think they paid much attention, but I've made about like 20 or 30 or 40 things since then. And then I took those same images, and they were cut in wood. And then I made sculptures of them. And this was the first thing I did with Harlan and Weaver, of the dead birds. And I used those same images at the mattress factory to make blankets, like packing blankets. That one I like. So that I took the same thing. I took the images and made rubber stamps out of them, and then cast the rubber stamps. That's at Tamarin, which was really great because I went there and I made another print, that print of a bird, and no one knew how to use a computer. And I was so impressed that they were really lithographers, that nobody knew how to use a computer. And I had to say, you have to get somebody from the computer department to come, because I made, the same thing. I made I put things together in Photoshop. I didn't know how to use a computer either, but I had the guy put things together in Photoshop and then make color separations, and then I drew all the separations separate. But they are very nice to work with too. Oh, and then, yeah, I made prints, and then they turned into stained glass painting. And those, yeah, the same images used in tapestry again. This is at Harlan and Weaver making, and at Harlan and Weaver, they were like a mile from my house. So I would work in the day and they would do their work in the day. And then about when my assistants would leave at 6 o'clock, I'd get on my bike, normally with plates in my basket, but here I couldn't, obviously. And we would stay till about 10 o'clock at night. And then Felix would just go, and it's like, you cannot come back here anymore for a while. It's like everybody was like sleep deprived. But I made this turkey print, which was using a la poupée, because all of these techniques have so much meaning and so much possibility in them. And I'm a big fan of turkeys. And also that I like making things plain. Like I always think I'm kind of monotheistic. Like I just can make one thing on a piece of paper, basically. Like this was a big transition in my brain to try to make, this sort for the Grand Central Madison, to try to make something that could have a background. That was a big leap. Those are prints that I made with a friend. It's just some stuff. This was made at Tampa Graphic Studio. At first, when I first started making prints, and I was asked to talk on some panel, and I felt like I was making prints at ULA, and then I started making prints at Harlan and Weaver. And then I felt like such a whore that I was going from one print shop to the next, and I was such a traitor and unfaithful, like such an unfaithful wife. And then I thought, no, I'm just like a bee pollinating. And actually it was really true, because Harlan and Weaver would use, they use a very nice, from Rio Grande, very nice sandpaper for sanding plates, for getting stuff out of plates. And no one else I knew used that. And it's so invaluable. So then I got, like at NYU or Columbia, I brought things for them. This was also Tampa Graphic Studio. That is at Alfred University. I think I better wrap this up. Alfred University. That's, again, this I made tapestries, and then it was a special tapestry machine that you could do 2 threads, which was a big deal. And then the man died, and his children and his nieces and nephews inherited it, and they took apart the machine and sold it. So now they can make tapestries, but they're not as beautiful. I mean, for me, it doesn't work. So then we had to start making digital prints, because we still like very much to work together. This is done at Smith College with Carol Weaver. From Harlan Weaver, we went. And this was the 2 prints that I made at Crown Point that was very wonderful to work there. And I always wanted to go back, but I met someone and got married. So then I didn't want to travel as much. This was the first soap, I think the first soap ground prints I made. And there's the young Nathan Callan up at Columbia University. And so now often what I've done, because like homeless, stateless, without like having printers close to where I live, I make my plates at NYU. I make all my plates myself, and then I go to Columbia, and then they publish them and print them. And that's like has saved my life these last 10 years. Oh, this is I had a residency at UNT. So yeah, like colleges, print facilities. This is Mike Karsten in Munster. This was a benefit for, I think, Provincetown Arts Place. And this is my friend Valerie Hammond. We did a residency at SCAD in Savannah, Georgia. And we went there and worked with students. And then we went to Lacoste in France because they had a school there. They still have a school there. And we taught students how to make, French folds with Xerox machines. That I made, these were also like color separate, I made I like a lot of times I make a drawing and then I have photographs and I look at the photographs and then I make my color separations and things. And this is like the title book there where it's like these waist pocket Bibles that were popular after the beginning of printing. But that you could wear your Bible in your waist. And this is Mass College of Art 20 years later with Fred Liang. And also because the print world is small and people are in lineages of printers. And this was during the pandemic. We had to teach online and I go to Valerie's house and we try to make up stupid things. So we started making things which I had with the potato prints done. So we made a penis with garlics and cabbage leaves and different things. Yeah, it was a cabbage leaf and garlics. And we just show the students and they think like, oh, we're being so stupid. But the second we got off the phone, we made an entire edition of that. but nobody they say people don't like collaborations. So that's with Mike Karsten in my house and Hillary Dees, my assistant for many years, cutting this print, which was a tree that came down in our yard that my husband cut. Then I made a sculpture from it too. So that was for Amnesty International with Mike Karsten. And this was also at SCAD. And then these are rubbing things. I think and this was the last print I made at ULAE with Brian Barry, who's here. And this is one of my favorite prints I made. I don't think it's very popular either, but I really love it because my husband was a woodcutter when I met him, and we had just tons of wood everywhere. And you'd do these crosscuts, and then I started using them for sculpture and making sculptures from them, but also, that they look like owls, that they'd have two eyes in them, that, where the forks are, they look like owls to me or just something. And then I made sculptures out of that wood. I made all different versions of it. This was one of my prints at NYU where I made prints using paper towels, a soft ground, and I was just putting on the ground on the plate, and I said, oh, that looks like clouds. I can make a landscape. So I've made these. But then it was I suggested it to the Gobelin, and they invited me to make a tapestry. And so I suggested that, and then this is the tapestry they wove from it, which is like 3 times the size of that. I was like horrified when I first saw it because it was so big. And this was just a Japanese print. I made a woodcut. And these are contact prints, because in our dark room at NYU we have a dark room in the print shop. So I made, and then these are also cyanotypes that then I made into flags, and then I made this at the Grand Central, and I made them into blankets too for a church in Freising. Oh, and then the students from one of the schools in China asked me if I would come, and if I would not come, but if I would make a woodcut with them. And so they made this woodcut of the moon. I gave them maps of the moon. And that was the first one that I did at Columbia University. This is the first print that Nieman Center published. It was based on those belt Bibles. That also. These are all from, I think I just like one print. Yeah, now I'm making these into mosaics. Like I'm making that into a mosaic now. That's Nicholas Price from Magnolia. It was just stuff. Oh, and this is my desperation. I made these at NYU, but then during the pandemic, and so now I'm really on my own. I have to, I make cutouts. I put soap ground all over them. I stick them on the plate, and then I make spray paint aqua tints, because I was given an aqua tint box, but I thought that will kill me, the dust. I'm not careful enough. So, and then that's Francesco came. We invite artists to come to our class. So he came and made a drawing of me, and I made that one. But this is the print I like now. So this was soap ground and then spray paint aqua tint. So, I think, oh, I'm perfect. I think by any means necessary, like artists are people that don't have to be stopped by anything. There are artists that are stopped by cultural and physical deterrents in the world, but for the most part, we're only stopped by ourselves. So, in printmaking, it's so infinite, the amount of things to learn, that it's really great. And I feel enormously privileged to have had so many opportunities printing with people. So thank you.
So thank you so much, both of you. So many interesting things to see, and so much food for thought. I'd like to have you both come up and have a sit, and then we'll open the floor to some questions, as well as questions from our online. So one for you guys, and then one. If you do ask a question for our online people, do ask it into the mic. Thanks. Okay.
That's my phone telling me.
Uh-oh.
Testing. There we go. I'll take the bait, and I have 2 questions, but I would love to hear the ivory soap story. That was about the white ground. And yeah, thank you both for incredible presentations. Second, I would love to hear more about the portable aqua tint box. And I love your description where you say it's grainless and it's perfection. And I also wanted to know, like, what is your etchant? Like, what are you etching, and how are you etching? And are you doing that in the, on the road, if you will.
Yeah. Well, is this on? Can you hear me? So I was flying to Turin to work with Giuseppe Pannone, and I had to change planes in Paris. And I was sitting next to a guy who looked like he was in his 40s on the leg from Paris to Turin. And he asked me why I was going to Turin. And I said, I'm going to actually do an art project there. And he said, oh, what do you do? And I said, etching. And he said, that's interesting. You know, my father-in-law teaches etching at the Cleveland Art Institute. And I said, oh, really? He said, yes, he's famous because he invented white ground aquatint. And I said, really, I'd like to hear about that. So it turns out that in the house, next to the laundry room, he had a little press. And he was just, you know, trying things, as Kiki knows, and, you know, people know you just try stuff out. And so he had ivory snowflakes. And he mixed them with some linseed oil, and he went into a studio and he got some titanium white ink, and he worked on it, and he you know, thinned it with water, and he just kept working on it, working on it, and then he developed a white ground or soap ground aquatint. It's called both, and the wonderful thing about it is, I'm sure you feel, is that you can get multiple tonalities in one etch. Other than the I thought that was a pretty amazing story, because I had so much white ground aquatint to actually sit next to this person whose father-in-law came up with the formula. Yeah, I generally etch with ferric chloride, and I'm happy with it. But except for that Peter Alexander print where I wanted to just have it really highly articulated, that's why I used Dutch Morden for that one. But generally just ferric, and on the road getting ferric. I used to just be able to carry it in my suitcase, but after 9/11, I could no longer do that, and I couldn't ship it either. So wherever I went, I had to find chemical supply places, which wasn't hard to do. When I did go to Turin on that trip, my luggage was lost, and my crate didn't arrive with my aquatint box in it. But Giuseppe knew a chemical supply place on the outskirts of town that was kind of in the middle of a place that sold gravel. So we went out there and we got ferric chloride crystals and was able to do it. Portable aquatint box was something I thought about for a while, and basically it's in the collection of the Modern, and they have a video on YouTube about it that they did in 2011 for the printout show with me explaining it. So anybody who wants to see it can see it on there. But it's basically two bellows from a 8x10 view camera. With a wooden platform in the center with a shelf, wire shelf that's built in it that you can pull out, and it expands because of the bellows of the 8x10 view cameras or that are used. So that was the largest bellows I could get at the time, and so it's powered by my own breath using surgical tubing, and I just grind the rosin really, really fine. And usually maybe 2 to 3 applications. And it just, every single time it came out flawless. There was one time where an artist wanted to have a little more grain. So I reground it and made it a little bit more granular. But other than that, it just comes out super clean.
So,
how do I melt the rosin? Well, basically, I would ship a hot plate in my crate. I had this crate that I put everything in, and I had a hot plate, and I had adapters, you know, to different voltages and different plugs in different countries, and then sometimes the artists would want to keep the hot plate, and so I just show up. I'd show up in a city, and I'd, you know, just go to a homeware store and buy a hot plate and just use that for a while, and I found some really, but artists really liked the hot plates, so I wound up giving a lot of them away.
Hi, Sue. Could you take the microphone?
Just a little follow-up. So how large is the largest plate that you can?
In the portable studio?
Yeah.
It's like maybe 9.5 by 7 inches. Yeah.
Anyone else? Well, I have a question. I have a question for you, Kiki. So, you know, you have your the printing and the different kind of things you think of with how to print are very interesting, but clearly the paper it's on is so much important to the end book. What are your thoughts about how you choose papers or choose papers particularly for printing?
I would say 99% of all the prints I've made are on Hahnemuller. Because for aquatint, it's very good. It's not really great that it is very sensitive to humidity and doesn't really lie flat. Like I had a show at Whitechapel, not at Whitechapel, it was another place in Oxford at the art center there. And it was a lot of prints and stuff because I thought, oh, that's easy to ship and stuff. And I went in and I was so embarrassed of all the rippling of the paper. I mean, the printing is perfect, but so we use Zirkle sometimes, but I don't know if that's around anymore. But and I've used a lot of Gampi, and then for all the photolithography, like I've made like just tons of drawings of photolithography at Columbia University. That was all on Himalayan paper, and which is Daphne also. It's also Gampi paper, but the color changed. They were getting too light. And then they said they didn't want it so light. They wanted it more traditional. And now it has much more bark and things in it. And also for me, everything I do depends on my assistants, what I have. And like my assistants who did lithography, it wasn't that they knew it, they just learned how to do it. But then they left, and then that's just the end of it. I have like, hundreds of pieces of paper that are printed that I have no idea what to do with, but no paper to back it with anymore, or to add paper around it, because I just can't find it anymore. And I think that is a lot about making things. Like you work with people and they have predilections for certain interests and stuff like that. And I like very much mixing the Gampi with, like in this tidal one and different things, mixing Gampi with Hahnemuller or different papers. But, I also try to learn something new every once in a while. And I do have, like you were talking about Whatman and stuff like that. I have from New York Central, which was one of the greatest places that ever existed. I have like Whatman 1954, I think, because that was the year I was born, and I thought that was funny to make something with. And I have tons of papers that don't exist anymore. Or I remember they had Japanese tea chest, and they said they're stopping making tea chest, and I just bought as much as I could find in the country, and I still have reserves of that because I liked working on that a lot. But it's all fascinating.
It's actually a good lead-in for a question that I had for Jacob, is that you do a lot of Shinkolei in your book, and and I think you told me earlier that you were the first U.S. clients, customers of Hiromi, which is also interesting to conservators who, and I think artists and printmakers who use a lot of Hiromi paper. But tell me about why you choose to go with the Shinkolei model for a lot of them.
First of all, Gampi paper has such a smooth, hard surface. It's just so immaculate printing aquatints on it. You can get such beautiful continuous tones. Also, it comes in a lot of different colors, but I had a lot of Gampi custom made for the projects that I did. And depending on the artist had particular, they would give me, watercolor drawdowns or oil paint drawdowns, and then I'd give them to Hiromi, and she'd send them to Japan, and then the paper would come back. I did that on a lot of different projects. On the Anish Kapoor project, we probably had 7 or 8 different color Gampi papers that we used. One of the things that's really interesting is what Kiki said about paper rippling and warping. It took me a while literally to deal with that situation. And I just found that 500 grams Somerset satin, and there was never any warping again. So, in terms of a backing paper, I also use a lot of Italian paper. I was really into Magnani Pesce for a while. I was really into Tiepolo for a while. A lot of different papers. And Whatman, I did some projects on Whatman, and just a couple of standard things. I did a project on Revere Polar White with Walid Rod because it was such a white paper, and there were white photo engravings, and The only thing that was colored was a little bit of linseed oil in the ink, but it could stand out on that Revere paper. I think looking for papers is really fun, and as Kiki said, we really miss New York Central. We've, that's rough, but I think that generally with the rise of digital printing and there's so many materials that are difficult to find or have been discontinued, and it's just one has to adapt, but it's still, I think it's difficult for people like us we miss those things. I'm glad you have a big stash of paper.
Yeah, but I also, I like that, things fall apart. Everything you do falls apart, and then you just make up something that you didn't expect. You learn some other way of working. I was thinking though, when you were talking about, I was just thinking about conservators, but I had a big drawing of mine going up at the Whitney Museum, and my assistant went up there there was some rip, so we'd bring methyl cellulose. It's just the Nepalese paper. And then they said, do not ever, she is never allowed in our conservative department, because I worked on the floor and all my drawings were covered with cat fur. And I just finished, I made a whole edition of prints at Columbia, which I finished last week. And there were one just black and white, and then I decided, I needed to draw on them. And then I needed with pencil, and then I need to draw them with color pencil. I bring them home, and then they all come back with cat fur again. And when I had my show at the Modern Museum, they had to work for months on all my paper before they could show it, of little ribs and cat fur and everything. So I am very in debt to conservators, I have to tell
Funny and very kind. I see a question here.
I just want to say one thing about conservators. When I was working with Sam Francis and Moses was there, and they're just a couple of old guys talking, and Moses wanted to use asphaltum and mix it with acrylic and oil paint, and he said, but I'm kind of worried because I think it'll make the canvas deteriorate or something. And Sam said, that's what we're here for, to employ conservators. So I'm done.
I just had a question for Kiki, actually, about that 2006 series that you did with Crown Point. And there's aquatint on the back of those prints as well. And I guess like it's part of the drip, or it's intentional. And I always wondered if it was like printed from each of the same plates, or it's like how there's the color.
The color was printing the back of the plates. We just took, because I'm still a novice in color. Like the tapestries were the first time I ever really, when I was young, I painted things in color, but then I thought I wanted my work like a gravestone, New England gravestones, and just plain. And but so that was one of the first colory things I made, besides the blue girls. And so we used the back of the plates because I didn't really know what to do for a background either, because it just makes the thing dead on the plate,
So the color background of the recta of the front of the prints is, you're saying, aquatint from the back of the plate?
No, we just took what was ever on the back of the plate and printed it in color, and thinned out the ink. And so, when they etched it or whatever, we were working with aquatint on the front, but whatever, acid dripped, it's just foul bite or something or other. It was just on the back.
Right, but it's on the actual back of the verso of the print, like that. I just hadn't seen that.
No, it just was the back of the plate. We printed a
On the
color,
front.
and then we printed the black on top. So it's red, yellow, and blue and black.
Okay.
This is a question for both of you. Do you dampen your paper, and for which techniques do you dampen paper, or do you not dampen paper?
Well, I used to soak the paper in a soaking bath, and I did that for a lot of years, and then I began misting it and just keeping it in plastic packs. and you miss it in the evening, and then you put it in a plastic pack and you tape it up, and then in the daytime it's perfect and you don't have to blot it. You just keep, sealing it up like a nice plastic envelope, and it works just fine. Of course it depends a bit on the paper, but most printing papers seem to respond pretty well to that treatment. Even when I was teaching, I had the students do that.
So we have, as I mentioned, some prints here. We have some portfolios and bound volumes from Jacob Samuel, and we have a few Kiki Smith prints. And so for those of you who are here, we invite you to come and take a look at them. And then also we have a reception outside so we can continue these conversations and I think continue talking about these fascinating subjects. I want to say one more time, thank you so much to our speakers, Kiki and Jacob. And we truly enjoyed having you here. Thank you. Good night.